They mistook observation for fear. Every pause, every moment I chose not to respond, they read as hesitation. They assumed I was avoiding conflict because I couldn't handle it. What they never considered was that I wasn't silent because I was scared. I was silent because I was still listening. I needed clarity before I decided whether conflict was even worth having. For a long time, I existed in that uncomfortable space where people project their own assumptions onto your restraint. I wasn't loud. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush to defend myself when something felt off. That alone was enough for them to draw conclusions. In their minds, confidence was volume. Strength was speed. And anyone who didn't react immediately must be uncertain, or worse, intimidated. What they didn't understand was that I was paying attention in a way they weren't. I was watching patterns, not moments. I was noticing who escalated quickly, who twisted narratives under pressure, who needed conflict to feel in control. While they were focused on winning arguments, I was focused on understanding what those arguments were actually revealing. There's a difference between avoiding conflict and postponing it. Avoidance is fear-driven. Postponement is intentional. One comes from insecurity, the other from discipline. I had learned, often the hard way, that reacting too early gives power to the wrong details. You end up arguing about symptoms instead of causes, noise instead of truth. So I waited. And in that waiting, they became comfortable. At first, the misinterpretation didn't bother me. It even worked in my favor. When people believe you're conflict-averse, they lower their guard. They speak more freely. They reveal motivations they usually keep hidden. They test boundaries, assuming there will be no resistance. I watched as small lines were crossed. Casual dismissals disguised as jokes. Decisions made without consultation. Subtle power plays framed as efficiency. Each moment was small enough to ignore on its own, which is exactly how these things grow. Slowly, quietly, by normalizing imbalance. They expected pushback that never came. And when it didn't, they took it as confirmation. They grew bolder, more certain, less careful. What they didn't realize was that every unchecked moment was being recorded, not emotionally, but cognitively. I wasn't storing resentment. I was gathering information. There's a clarity that comes from not reacting. When you remove your ego from the immediate exchange, you start seeing structure. You notice who benefits from tension and who suffers from it. You see which conflicts are accidental and which are strategic. They thought I lacked the nerve to confront them. In reality, I was deciding if confrontation would change anything at all. Internally, the pressure was building. Not explosive, but steady. Like weight added grain by grain. There were moments when speaking up would have felt satisfying, even justified. Moments where a sharp response could have shut things down temporarily. But temporary victories are expensive. They give the illusion of resolution while ensuring the behavior resurfaces later, better disguised. Ask myself questions instead of reacting. What outcome do I want? What pattern am I responding to? If I speak now, am I clarifying or just discharging tension? Those questions slowed me down, and in that slowness, something important happened. I stopped needing them to understand me. That's when clarity really started forming. When your goal shifts from being seen as strong to being effective, your timing changes. You realize that not every misunderstanding needs correction. Some need exposure. They kept pushing, testing how far my silence would stretch. Each test revealed more about their assumptions. They assumed I needed harmony more than honesty, that I valued approval over boundaries. That discomfort would make me fold. What they never noticed was how my silence evolved. It wasn't passive anymore. It was selective. I stopped engaging in conversations that went nowhere. I let flawed logic stand without rescuing it. I allowed decisions to play out without volunteering to fix their consequences. That unsettled them more than confrontation ever would have. When someone who usually absorbs tension stops doing so, the tension doesn't disappear. It moves. And suddenly, they were dealing with the weight they had offloaded onto me. The moment of clarity didn't arrive dramatically. There was no single incident that forced my hand. It was a realization that settled in quietly. I saw the pattern in full. Not just what was happening, but why it kept happening. Conflict, for them, wasn't about resolution. It was about dominance. About establishing who could speak freely and who had to be careful. As long as I reacted emotionally, they controlled the pace. As long as I stayed silent, they assumed control by default. The only way to change the dynamic wasn't louder confrontation. It was precise confrontation. Limited. Intentional. Focused on facts they couldn't dismiss without exposing themselves. That's when I knew it was time. Not because I was angry, but because I was clear. When I finally spoke, it wasn't in the heat of a moment. It wasn't reactive. It wasn't defensive. That alone caught them off guard. They were used to conflict being emotional, chaotic, loud. They didn't know how to handle calm. I didn't address everything. Just one issue. One pattern. I named it clearly, without exaggeration. I explained the impact, not with accusation, but with specificity. And then I stopped talking. Silence after clarity is powerful. It doesn't invite debate. It invites reflection. Or exposure. They tried to deflect at first. Light humor. Minimization. The usual tools. But those only work when the other person is invested in harmony. I wasn't. I was invested in truth. I repeated myself once, calmly. No added emotion.
No escalation.
Just clarity, restated. That's when the shift happened. Not outwardly, but internally for them. You could feel it. The realization that this wasn't a fight they could win by volume or intimidation. That I hadn't been avoiding conflict. I had been choosing when to engage. After that, things changed in subtle but permanent ways. They became more careful with their words. More deliberate with decisions. Not because they suddenly respected me more, but because they understood me differently. They saw that my silence wasn't emptiness. It was containment. And once containment is released, it doesn't come back the same way. I didn't confront every issue afterward. I didn't need to. The dynamic had shifted. They no longer assumed my quiet meant consent. They knew now that silence could simply mean I was observing again. What surprised me most was how little satisfaction I felt. There was no rush.
No triumph.
Just steadiness. The calm that comes from alignment between action and intention. I realized then that clarity is the real source of confidence. Not the ability to argue, but the ability to choose when argument is necessary. Not the impulse to react, but the discipline to wait until reaction becomes irrelevant. Looking back, I understand why they misjudged me. Our culture rewards immediacy. Quick responses. Visible emotion. Waiting is often framed as weakness because it can't be measured easily. But waiting, when done consciously, sharpens perception. It separates impulse from insight. It allows you to confront not just behavior, but structure. I don't believe all confrontation should be delayed. Some moments demand immediate response. But I've learned that clarity should always come before conflict. Without it, you're just adding noise to a system that already thrives on it. They thought I was afraid of conflict. The truth is, I respect it too much to waste it. So I'll leave you with this. The next time someone mistakes your restraint for fear, ask yourself what you're really waiting for. Are you avoiding discomfort, or are you gathering clarity? And when you finally speak, will it be to release emotion or to change the pattern entirely? If this resonated, take a moment to reflect and stay with me if you want to explore more stories where quiet strength reshapes power without raising its voice.